Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Matt Mueller, editor of Screen International. Welcome to this edition of Screen Talk, in which I'm delighted to welcome Ben Roberts, the new chief executive of the BFI. The format for today's talk is I will moderate a 30-minute or so conversation with Ben, and that will be followed by questions that have been sent to us in advance by the industry. We hope to get through as many of these as possible with Ben today, but we won't be able to take any live questions due to time constraints. So of course, I think everyone watching will already know who Ben is, but to quickly recap, he joined the BFI in 2012 as director of the Film Fund, and he was confirmed as the new CEO to replace Amanda Neville last December. Ben officially stepped into his CEO role in mid-February, and within weeks, he'd had to take the decision to cancel BFI Flair, close BFI South Bank, close the National Archives, and start to think about an industry-wide response to the nationwide lockdown. As Ben himself says, this wasn't the trajectory he was planning. So Ben, just to start, can you tell us about those first few days in the role, particularly once the scale of the pandemic was becoming evident?
Hi, Matt. Hi, everyone. Yeah, I think as everyone would have experienced a version of this where I don't think you could anticipate what the long-term bigger picture was going to look like. So we were making sort of 24-hour decisions. And even the week before Flair, and other festivals were making the decision not to run their editions, we were still not necessarily making that call because, you know, we were thinking that maybe we'd be locked down for a week, which seems mad now, but that's, you know, we couldn't get our heads around this concept. So I think things escalated at speed. So there wasn't really time to think beyond what immediately needed doing. And I think the order of events for us was, okay, Flair's not going to happen. We weren't going to get international visitors to the event. We were running a risk of maybe being closed midway through the event. So that was a very sad decision. But then the next decision was, let's get online and let's see if we can run a version of the festival online. And thank God for BFI Player, because we had a channel set up and ready to go. And that community of filmmakers and audiences responded brilliantly to Trisha and her team's plan to get the festival online. And it was a very early sort of innovation for us, not just running a festival or a program online, but that we did get some films that were due to screen in the festival onto the online version of Flair within a matter of days. So there was definitely a sort of adrenalized approach to running through those early moments. The decision to close the South Bank was, partially ours, but also partially not ours, given that there was a sort of government decision as to what should happen to public spaces. And then, as you described, my job and the job of the executive and the board has become sort of twofold. One, we've got to look after an organization of 500 plus employees and all of our activities and all of our estate, and what do we do with that? And then immediately having to leap to what quickly became a very urgent challenge around the workforce. And I think that was definitely day one challenge, as we've all seen and discussed, was how do we quickly try and get some very immediate needs to the most challenged part of the workforce. So those are the first few days, and all thoughts of my grander plans for strategy are there, but they've somewhat gone on hold.
Yes, temporary hold for a while. And can you tell us about give us an overview of the Screen Sector Task Force and how that is working? That's one thing that you, I guess, reassembled from the Brexit Task Force that had existed before. And this was set up again to tackle the COVID-19 crisis. So can you tell us who's sitting on that, how often you're meeting, and how you're conducting conversations with government?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very pan-industry group, as you say. It was set up for conversations around Brexit initially, and it was a way for us to make sure that we were channeling all the right information and all the right sort of policy and financial proposals into DCMS, with whom we have a particularly close relationship. So it captures pretty much all of the stakeholder groups that you would expect. So all the major trade bodies, the broadcasters, everyone, pretty much everyone across the film, TV, and game sector, actually, because it's a Screen Sector Task Force. So we brought everyone into scope. We're looking across 5 main areas, and they're all been broken down into recovery groups. So there's an inward investment group, which the BFC are leading on. There's a domestic TV production and broadcasting group, which John McVeigh and Pact are sort of leading on. There's an indie film group, which I'm going to chair. There's a distribution and exhibition group, which the UKCA and the FDA are chairing. And there's a games group that Joe Twist from UK is running at the same time. So that gives you a sense of the scale of the participants. I'd say the group of participants in terms of individuals is double what it was for the Brexit group. You know, this is a really major undertaking, which is why we've broken it down into those 5 subgroups. And then the plan is to look at, you know, what is needed in terms of the unresolved live short-term issues which we need to deal with now. They're being prioritized, and they are outstanding issues relating to workforce, issues around rents, you know, particularly as it relates to the cinema estate. So there's some unresolved live short-term issues which we're looking at. And then the group is going to be mostly focused on how we move towards sort of swift and safe recovery. And I think the 2 primary areas that we're looking at, but there will be many more, are in the short term, ensuring that there are sort of safe space protocols in place, both for production environments and exhibition environments. And there are some, you know, really fast emerging issues around production insurances. And I'm sure we'll talk about that a bit more. And then beyond that, how do we make sure that we retain our competitive edge as an industry? You know, we have been a fantastic growth story as a sector for some time now, and we need to then look as groups at what longer term structural changes might be needed to ensure that we retain that competitive edge. So, you know, that's the scope of the group. We're meeting on a weekly basis, and the subgroups are meeting. I think that proposals will start to sort of channel through anywhere from a matter of weeks through to the rest of this year, based on urgency of need and priority. And the real value of that group is that we're really, really joined up. And as much as everyone has their own issues and their own agendas, and there's quite a lot of, you know, necessary lobbying going on by individual groups, that we can coordinate everybody, and we can speak as one voice into government. And DCMS are really valuing this as a channel of communication around what we think we need to do to recover well.
So when you say you're coordinating everybody, does that mean that's what you're doing and the BFI are doing? So the subgroups are led, as you say, by BFC and UKCA, but the BFI are kind of leading the conversation with government that comes out of those different discussions.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think our job at the BFI is to sort of coordinate from the middle. And there is expertise across the piece. So I think the UK is doing a really good job, is my view. And I think we work well together because we have always been well coordinated as a sector. And that's where we sit at the BFI, sort of working with all our partners and making sure that, you know, we're not doing everyone's job, but that we're making sure that the messages and the approach to DCMS is clear, really consistent, evidenced. You know, we're using our research and statistics unit to work with other groups to pull together the right kind of analysis, so that as we're putting forward proposals to government where they need to be properly evidenced, we've got that work done and we've got that research done. So, you know, our external affairs team, our policy and research teams are there as a resource for all of the groups to use. And our conversation with DCMS, which is daily, is a great relationship, and very, you know, very sort of a relationship based on measured analysis and a strong understanding of what needs to be done. That's going to get us the best result.
Yeah. Talking about your own existing funds for, so your funds for shorts, features, and talent development remain in place, but are you redistributing funds towards areas based on need as well? You've set up different funds, the continuation fund for productions, for instance, the resilience fund for exhibition. Can you talk a little bit about how you are redistributing money to kind of, to help those in need?
Yeah, sure. So obviously most of, but not quite all of our funding that we're able to repurpose is lottery funding. And we are not alone amongst the lottery distributors in having to quickly respond to the needs of those that we fund. There's several different ways we can do that. The most straightforward way that we can do that is where we have a funding agreement with someone in place, whether it's a partner or an organization or a production, is that we had to apply the right level of flexibility towards that award in terms of how quickly we could get that award out to people. Short-term, immediate cash flow challenges, and how could we use those awards to improve that situation. Being realistic about when we could expect to see the outcomes of the award. So that's the first thing we did across the board. And then within our funds, obviously we have a development fund, we have a production fund, we have an audience fund. What could we repurpose so that we could respond to some short-term needs? So just walking through those quickly, step by step. I mean, first thing to say is we're open for business as usual. So our funds are open, our funding streams are open, and our teams are taking applications as normal. So for anyone who wants to apply to us for funding, we are there and we are processing awards. Our finance committee is meeting every week and greenlighting awards as normal. The development fund and our network funds are probably the primary channel for creatives at the moment, for creative practice to access money from us. So, we are making awards as normal for shorts, for treatments, for project development. And we have moved to, front loading the cash flow of those development awards. And, I think you've ran information on that previously, and we can maybe put some information in the chat at some point about how we're doing that. Production obviously has somewhat stopped temporarily. And what we did just sort of going into shutdown was we made some additional money available for a number of productions that were sort of facing some short-term sort of enhanced shutdown costs. And we are about to launch the continuation fund, which you mentioned, which is for those independent productions, and not just the ones that we'd already got lottery money in, that were in late prep or already shooting and have been paused and are finding that they've incurred some additional stand down costs or will have additional startup costs at the point at which they can start up. So that fund is opening on the 29th of this month, and it'll be open for roughly a month, and we'll be publishing guidelines on that shortly if we haven't already. I've lost track of what day it is. And I think that will have to probably be administered on a first come, first served basis, which is why we're running it for a sort of a month's period of time, so we can ascertain how many affected productions there were. And then on the audience side, on the exhibition side, we've already opened the Resilience Fund, which is running through the Film Audience Network and has a sort of strong focus on supporting the indie cinema sector, film festivals and touring operators who are where they are not eligible for certain government schemes. So, some staff costs where government schemes aren't capturing, some sort of unpaid expenditure, some rent costs. So probably the hardest hit of the independent sector. And that fund opened on the 15th of April, I think, and is open until around May the 6th, and that's being administered through the Film Audience Network. So that's a couple of our repurposed funds. We also have opened up our lockboxes
Yeah.
in terms of the eligible criteria for the lot boxes. Overhead costs were not previously in scope for as something to draw down from a locked box, and we've brought that in scope. Although we're sort of looking at that on a case-by-case basis. So if anyone with a lot box should get in touch with our production finance team if you're looking to draw down some additional resources from that. So I'd say we're doing all we can to make sure that our open schemes are as flexible as possible at this time.
Yeah. One thing I want to ask you about is obviously the position freelancers find themselves in. One thing that was set up was the COVID-19 Film and TV Emergency Relief Fund, which you set up with the Film and TV charity, which did reach £3 million in donations, including your own £500,000 contribution from lottery funding. But that still fell $2 million short of applications. And I wonder what steps are being taken to address that gap.
Yeah, look, I mean, the first thing to say about that fund is that it's demonstrated exactly what the scale of the need is. And also, working with Alex and her team at the Film and TV charity, we'll get some pretty clear data coming out of that, not just in terms of who has applied in terms of, which disciplines seem to have needed it the most, but, where they are, who they are, what level of support they're looking for. And that will help with any ongoing conversations that we can still have with government about support for PAYE freelancers who've fallen out of any government schemes so far. And we know that there are approximately 20,000 odd PAYE freelancers who we think have fallen outside of schemes. So, the fund, thank God for that fund, and kudos to Alex and the Film and TV Charity Fund for all the work they've been doing processing that so quickly. I know that there is a plan to do a further fundraising round. I think that ideally we would see further contributions coming from industry, and hopefully this sort of gap that has clearly materialized between the amount of money raised so far and the scale of the need will help us in future fundraising rounds. I also think that in addition to whatever further funding we can get through that process, we'll see that the scale of the need probably starts to evolve over time. So, understanding a bit more what different needs look like. But remember that the Film and TV charity also opened up a loan scheme fund at the same time. And I think they'll be pulling, some data out of that as well in terms of who that captured that this didn't. So more money needed, clearly.
Yeah, and what about the BFI itself? I mean, are there any impacts from loss of revenue yourself? I mean, in the closure of the BFI South Bank, for instance. I mean, is that having any impact on your own, spending this year?
Yeah, I mean, it's massive. It's overwhelming. Yeah. I mean, as I said at the top, as well as looking to how we support the industry, we as an organisation are. We're a public body, but we're actually only a third of our income comes from government funding. We are very reliant, as with so many in the commercial sector, the exhibition sector, distribution sector, on the income that we earn, whether that's through ticket sales, all our commercial activities, how we fundraise, how we use the IMAX to sell advertising space. Our food and beverage partnerships, the rent that we get from partners in our buildings, and it's all just stopped. So, much like everybody else, that has all just stopped. Yeah. So, we're lucky because we do have a seam of funding that comes from government, but it is not enough for us by any means. And so, we are also having daily conversations about our cash flow, our viability as an organisation, and so thanks for asking. It is tough.
Well, you have to look at things like the budget for the LFF, for instance. I assume that's probably one of the things that might be with you, or.
Yeah, I mean, LFF is obviously a key question at the moment in terms of what's LFF going to look like, and we're all dealing with the same unknowns in terms of when we think we're going to be back online. I think there's some big decisions that we have to make for LFF in the next few months, and I think the question for LFF is, Tricia and her team are thinking very hard at the moment about exactly what shape it will take. I mean, at the moment we are planning for LFF, and I do think that festivals, including LFF and sort of the autumn season, if we are back online in some form by then, it's going to be they're all quite an important moment in reminding audiences of what a particular pleasure the communal experience of watching films in a cinema is.
Yeah.
So, obviously major conversation at the moment, and scenario planning the hell out of it.
Yeah. One of the, obviously, a lot of people listening to this webinar will be very concerned about the production side of, the industry in terms of the total shutdown of production, and then also what the uncertainty around when productions might be able to resume. What measures are you looking at, or have you discussed so far with government that might be, are you able to talk at the stage about what might be applicable to when production can resume? And do you see a best case scenario for productions being able to resume?
I'm trying really hard not to be that sort of crystal ball gazer who just sort of spins his own version of when I think the world's going to return to normal. And I think we're all doing that. I mean, this goes back to the task force, I think, and specifically to the groups that are being led by the British Film Commission, and alongside that, the Independent Film Group. The first thing to say is that, guidance is being worked up at speed regarding, safe spaces, set safety, and how you could operate a set under some existing social distancing measures. So that's, Adrian Wotton and that Inward Investment Group and the Independent Film Group will sort of dovetail with that, are absolutely focused on that, working up those guidelines. And I think those guidelines will be, worked up within a matter of weeks. And that will cover everything from, physical production, locations, VFX. There is expertise across the value chain working in that group. I think our job is to make sure that there is consistency across the TV sector, across the film sector, the independent sector, the studio sector. And also, we will have to run those guidelines through government. So, we'll have to run them through Public Health England. We'll have to make sure that they're, we're in agreement with the unions. But what I will say is the government is very keen for production to start again as soon as possible. As I said earlier, we are a fantastic growth story in the UK. And the most important thing now is that we are, gearing up again, and that there is a strong message that we are open without doing it before it's safe to do so. So I think those guidelines are going to be key. And even though there is nothing sort of lawfully prohibiting production starting at any point, as long as it abides by social distancing measures, I think what we really want to do is get government's sort of sponsorship and green light, if you like, that our sector is one of the first sectors to go back to work within the possibilities afforded to us by social distancing measures. And I know that that group has already done a huge amount of work to get us along the way. So I definitely won't give you any idea of when I think that will be, but I will say that I think the key to unlocking it is making sure that those guidelines are signed off, if you like, and signed off through Public Health England, signed off by the union, signed off by all the stakeholders in the mix. And then we should be, ahead of the curve. And I think we'll be ahead of the curve on that. I think the other side of this coin is the exhibition sector, and maybe you want to sort of talk about that in a bit, but a similar piece of work will be done by Phil Clapp, Andy Lation, the distribution, the exhibition group, to make sure that there is a similar set of protocols in place that can be applied across the piece, so that when that that area of business is allowed to open again by government, that the protocols are in place, everyone's working to the same ones, we can make audiences feel that we are a safe environment to return to and communicate that clearly and consistently. So that work's being done in parallel at the moment as well. And I think that at the moment, there is definitely a sort of, I always get this the wrong way around, but, plan for the best, prepare for the worst scenario where, the best might be some point in June, the worst might be some point in September, but who knows?
Right. Okay. And presumably, people are looking at what other countries are doing as well in terms of the measures they're putting in place and how quickly they're reopening things. There must be a sort of international perspective on what others are doing too.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Screen Sector Group is sharing, a huge amount of information that's being pulled from what's happening with our peers internationally, and obviously we talk to them as well. So, I mean, of course, we're all operating under slightly different jurisdictions and sort of different approaches to returning, and also different approaches to sort of testing, different approaches to herd immunity, etc. So, you can't. All things are not equal, if you like. But I think that that we are anticipating there to be a certain sort of phased opening. So focus on safe spaces, definitely. Recognizing that there's not going to be a moment where the lights go back on and everyone's back at full speed, either in terms of production or cinemas.
Yeah. And I guess it's too soon to press you on specific measures, like, how long would a crew need to go into quarantine before a shoot? I mean, those sort of questions that I guess some in the production community are asking, and also, how many people could be in a cinema? I guess that's all stuff that's being worked out as we go, and there's no specific.
Yeah, exactly. I think probably not worth doing it now, because I think within a few weeks, the guidelines, the protocols, certainly on the production side, will start to emerge. But everything you're talking about, because there's other issues in here around affordability. I think whatever protocol is put in place, and that's why it's important that both the studio and the independent sectors are talking together, is that there's going to be costs here in addition to the costs that already exist for sort of shutting down or starting up. So we are going to have to factor in not just what the guidance is and the protocols are, but how affordable is it for everybody to implement them. So still quite a lot of conversations to have there. And also there's the question of, when talent starts traveling again. And I think other conversations going on, which we haven't talked about here yet, around, how is the sector going to coordinate and make sure that there is a decent approach towards accessing crew, accessing talent, particularly for those productions that were sort of stood down and will need to sort of finish. I think there are various gentlewoman agreements being discussed across the TV and film sector to make sure that there isn't too much of a gold rush towards open, available crew, because that's another big concern, obviously.
Yeah, and you're overseeing the independent film task force. Are there any discussions that you're having about ways you might be able to jumpstart the independent production scene back up again once measures are in place and lockdown restrictions ameliorate, etc.?
We're actually meeting
with Film 4 and BBC Films. Are there any discussions the three of you are having together, maybe even?
Yeah, we're actually meeting as a group, as a specific group, for the first time tomorrow. So we've been meeting as an Uber group for the last month or so. But we're sort of starting those conversations tomorrow. I think as I mentioned in relation to sort of the continuation fund that we're opening, there is going to be a cost for productions getting back up and running. So we talk to our partners and our public funding partners all the time about how we cooperate on getting, supporting productions in the best way that we can. I think, there's a broader opportunity for the independent group to look at how we sort of change the fortunes of the independent sector for the better and for the long term. Because even prior to this, we were meeting as a sector as recently as a couple of weeks before we were all shut down to talk about what long-term changes were needed to make sure that the fortunes of independent film were intact. So, we're entering a recovery phase from quite a low base.
Yeah.
And my hope is that, where you can sort of look to learn from learn or benefit from a challenging situation, how can we radically rethink what the model for independent film looks like in terms of distribution, finance, production. So, there is the immediate short-term issue around getting productions back on track, but there is also a much longer-term need to make sure that independent film is healthy.
Yeah.
And that's, I think that's, the group will absolutely have to focus on recovery, but within that, no doubt, we will talk about sort of longer-term structural and maybe even legislative sort of changes.
What can you talk a little bit about looking longer term? What is the current situation forced you to confront? I mean, what are you thinking about long term? Obviously we don't know. We don't know what's going to happen with cinemas. Will people rush back into cinemas? That's a question, obviously, for a lot of people. The streamers obviously are having a very big advantage at the moment. Everyone's kind of watching online, and some studios are putting films online much earlier than they obviously would have before this all happened. And will that sort of business model change in the future? I guess what's your perspective on these questions?
I think the big opportunity here is to reframe what an online release means to both distributors, financiers, and audiences, and cinemas, hopefully, as well. And obviously, at the moment, what's happening is that the rule book is slightly thrown to one side, and I think we haven't really even started to see it yet, but there'll be an increasing amount of necessary experimentation with how you can get a film in front of an audience, particularly with all those films that have fallen off the release calendar over the summer, and will struggle in some instances to get back on it when we get back online. So this isn't about sort of being opportunistic. This is about necessarily finding a way to audiences. And given that we're in a certain kind of freewheeling moment, I think that lots of different models will emerge, and some of them won't work. Some of them will be really successful in terms of generating a sort of a scale of audience that perhaps we hadn't seen before. And then we need to start to sort of grab those concepts and those models and see whether they are actually viable from a financial point of view rather than a sort of disaster recovery point of view. But I know from our own experience with BFI Player that we have seen a significant uptick in traffic to the BFI Player, both across the kind of the free collections that we operate, but also in terms of new subscribers to the platform, which have at least doubled in a very short space of time. And then within the subscribers, the level of their activity, number of films that they're all watching, has also gone up, unsurprisingly, obviously. But how do we capture that? Let's not just think about streamers as the big streamers. Let's think about online, and how maybe an inverted or a disrupted release pattern is not seen as disruptive or an agitator or a concession of defeat, but actually you take control of those models and you make them work. And that there is money in it, and obviously there has to be money in it, because audiences have also spent this period of time falling in love with a broader range of viewing experiences.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's true. It's true. I'm going to switch over to some audience questions now, because we did have quite a few of those, and I do want to get through some of them. So I'm going to start with. So we did touch on this a little bit earlier. Obviously the difficult question around insurance. So this is a question from Elizabeth Carlson. Is there a planned task force to coordinate a practical production plan with production insurers? At the moment, their directives are not viable, nor do they appear to be based on data that is available on COVID transmission and infection in the production demographic. Without a viable set of directives, we cannot get productions going again.
Yeah. Hi, Liz. I mean, this has emerged as one of the major challenges for production. And there is no question that alongside ensuring safer environments, it's probably the major issue that we need to get sorted as soon as possible, and that the task force will deal with. So, the production insurance has hit a number of the sectors that we've run into subgroups at the task force. Obviously, the inward investment sector, the TV sector, the independent film sector. So it's quite a cross-cutting issue, but it's a major issue. And I think that clearly, if pandemic insurance coverage or COVID insurance coverage, or the sort of the guidance as it currently exists, no longer works, then there will need to be a backstop insurance position needed, and that's obviously something we'll need to talk to government about.
Yeah, and that's a follow-up question from Peter Watson at Hanway, who says the absence of this cover is going to create massive costs for productions, and in many cases financiers will simply decline to provide production cash flow without it. Yeah. So could the government work with the insurance and film finance sector to provide specialist underwriting capacity for these specific risks, and would the BFI lead a campaign to access this sort of insurance product with the benefit of a government backstop?
I mean, Peter Watson always has one of the biggest brains and the best ideas in terms of what are the best ways forward under duress, and fortunately, the group is already considering exactly that kind of proposal. I mean, obviously, it's something we want to sort of work up properly. And I think, as I said earlier, the strength of the task force will be how we put proposals to DCMS and how we measure them, and how we measure the scale of need and the impact if they are not, if we don't have remedies in place. But yeah, I think some version of underwriting, where that sits, I think is still a kind of question mark, but that level of underwriting is obviously necessary. I also think that, we, for example, as a funder, have occasionally, more than occasionally actually, allowed independent films to go into production without a bond in place. And, in a way, we've almost therefore acted as a sort of de facto insurance provider. And I think that, the public service broadcaster film financiers have done the same on occasion as well. So there might be a blended model of how we get them.
Yeah. So we've also mentioned the huge success of the inward investment money with the creative sectors. Given the considerable income generated by this part of the industry, should that be the priority to restart the UK film and high-end TV production back in the UK? Should that be the priority for everyone?
Yes. I mean, yes. Capital yes. And I think that if the government feel comfortable with the procedures and the kind of the protocols that we're able to put them through to them via the BFC group, then that will hopefully give us a fairly quick green light to get back to work. But a lot at the moment, to be honest with you, a lot of that does rest in our hands. I think I think the responsibility is on the task force, the recovery groups, everyone that's working within those groups to sort of get that together as quickly as possible. And I think, as I said before, I think we are somewhat ahead of the curve in that regard, and hopefully we'll have something into government in a matter of weeks.
Okay.
Yeah, so, absolutely a priority. Yeah.
This probably is a question about a little bit of your previous role, or a little bit of which you also still do. Is the role of the BFI still relevant as a production funding entity in a time when production cash is abundantly available in the market and streamers are breaking more emerging talent than public institutions? Is it perhaps time to rethink how the money is spent and put greater emphasis on developments, an area where the market is less prepared to take risks? And that's from JJ Loosberg.
Oh, JJ, ex-UK Film Council Production Development Executive. JJ, what's happened? Yes, of course it's still relevant. I think that, look, there's a lot of production cash available in the market. I think if you straw polled many independent producers, they would say there is not a lot of available cash, and it very much depends on what type of material you are making and whether the streamers have the appetite for that type of material. I mean, our job is to ensure that there is sufficient cultural diversity and creative diversity in the material being produced. And I love the streamers. They have been a fantastic boon to the creative sector in the UK, but let's not put all our eggs in that particular basket. There are many films which are, for very clear commercial reasons, not the preserve of the streamers, as they're not the preserve of the studios or the commercial marketplace. So, no, I don't agree with the concept. I think that the idea that we should be focused on development is something that, I mean, we are very focused on development. I think we're probably the largest public development fund in the UK, and that's very, very needed cash, none more so than right now. So this is a moment for people to be creative and for people to be writing and generating new projects, and that's exactly what our money's for. But lots of the projects will come out the other side of that period of development, and I think it is a misrepresentation to say that there is abundant production cash out there in the market. For many independent producers, that is not the case.
Yeah, well, this next question is related to that then, because the lack of abundant cash in the market, given the current COVID-19 issues and the difficulty in raising film finance, would the BFI consider pressing the government to put up a very substantial sum to the BFI to allow fully UK financed British movies to be made at a reasonable budget level? And this is from Nick Barton of Harbour Pictures.
Okay, thanks, Nick. I think that, like I say, the independent group of the task force is going to be meeting to look at recovery models, and also, how do we make sure that our independent sector, which is so critical in the UK, thrives. I mean, we already moved within our limited abilities to being able to fully finance, lower budget independent films a couple of years ago, because we recognised that there were some challenges for particularly difficult films to raise finance beyond them. I guess Nick's question, because Nick is typically working at sort of larger budget scales, is about larger budget films. I mean, I should think it will come up for consideration that we may have state aid issues, of course. Yeah. And we are always dealing with state aid issues. I think that, the making sure that the tax reliefs continue to be as advantageous as they possibly can will be part of our conversation across the piece. But yeah, I mean, I think it will be in scope. I think, state aid and available money are always the issues.
So the next question is about the more vulnerable members of the film community who are really struggling right now. Is there a danger that the financial marginalization that's going on could potentially undo all the good work that BFI has been leading on to improve social inclusion, ethnic and gender diversity, etc., and representation in the industry? Are there any additional steps that can be taken here to protect those groups?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a danger. I think, not specific to the film industry, but obviously the scale of sort of financial devastation on the most impacted individuals is significant. So this will range from people just being poorer generally on the other side of this pandemic, potentially, to having to make decisions about what kind of secure and long-term work they need to take. And I think that what this has shown us is that there's a real vulnerability in our workforce, and we're going to really think very seriously about how we ensure that our workforce is less vulnerable, both as individuals but also as a workforce that needs to be able to carry on working. And yeah, we are very focused and have been for some time on making sure that the ramp is down and that everyone can get onto it who wants to work in film and have a kind of creative practice or a job in the industry. So I guess what we'll be thinking about is, firstly, how easily does money flow to individuals? And I think that the experience being felt by many freelancers and the responses to that is something we're going to have to consider over the long term, in terms of the flowing of money to those who can't rely on other streams of income while they wait to deliver. So that's something we're going to have to look at. I mean, we do, all our funding programs, from our training programs, from the Film Academy, to our work with Screen Skills, through to our talent development programs run by Network, through to development and production, have been increasingly focused on making sure that the ramp is down. We will definitely learn some more lessons from this, and I would say that we will have to make sure that everyone feels equitable on the other side of COVID, because there will otherwise be a massive impact on cultural output. And this is not a moment, there's no moment, but this is not a moment to have an impact on cultural output, because actually what we need to emerge from this moment is a real diversity of storytelling and experience and response. And I don't mean 25 isolation dramas, but I mean all great art says something really interesting about particular moments in history, about social anxiety, whatever it is. And this is one of those moments, and everyone is having a very different lived experience at the moment. So it's a big deal.
There's a sort of additional question to that, which is related to obviously evidenced by the Film and TV Charities statement on the number of people in the industry who are experiencing mental health issues due to the crisis. Is there anything that BFI can do to help with that? Is that something that you are going to get involved in?
Well, we're already involved with the Film and TV Charity on their mental health work. So we're on their steering group, their advisory board. So, and they're doing a really good job, and they've been leading on that piece of work, and it's been running in tandem now with their freelancer support work as well. So I'm very happy that the BFI are backing the Film and TV Charity up on this piece of work, because they're, as with the relief fund, they're exactly the right people to be leading on it.
Yeah,
but we're part of that conversation. We're supporting them however we can.
Then, given that the exhibition industry has been devastated by lockdown and film festivals are moving online, do you anticipate any moves to change the definition of film after lockdown? And if so, how will the industry get HMRC to accept this and apply it to the tax credit?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there are some necessary. We need to look at some changes in perspective. I'm sort of reversing away from sort of talking about changing definitions, but that might be where we go, because I think there's a number of films, like we're running some quite Luddite concepts at the moment, and one of them is definitions of film as they relate to the tax reliefs. One of them is, and this year's going to be really interesting, what happens with the award season in terms of the eligibility of films that are theatrically released or not theatrically released. So, I think that will, there's no doubt there's going to be a conversation about tax reliefs as part of the task force conversations, because, there's such a sort of underpinning of our of our industry and so vital. So are there remedies within that we could look at? I reckon there are. I mean, I've asked that same question in my head many times, because obviously we have tweaked our own eligibility criteria around what we support with lottery funding. So we can now technically support a feature film that isn't released theatrically, or a piece of filmmaking that is neither a short film or a feature-length film, and could be episodic or could be interactive. So these definitions are definitely becoming quite unhelpful, because the forms are evolving.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think something will have to shift at some point. I mean, I think it's worth saying for everyone on this call that we have to be really careful when we look at the tax reliefs, because they're pretty amazing that we've got them, and there is always a risk that when you go into opening them up, that a number of unintended consequences occur, and you start, they start being recalculated in different ways. So we're always, if we ever seem slightly kind of reticent around sort of tax reliefs, it's not because we don't want them to be optimized. And I think there's a lot more that could be done with the tax reliefs. It's because they're sort of fragile eggs. So well, no, I don't mean they're fragile in terms of the Treasury's commitment to them. In fact, the Treasury has recommitted to them very recently. We ran the Screen Business Report, and we did a recalculation of impact, and they are highly valued by government and by Treasury. So I don't mean fragile in that regard. What I mean is that there are always lots. It was probably the wrong phrase. They're often seen as a vehicle for change in lots of different ways. So, there's been a conversation about diversity as it relates to the tax relief, sustainability as it relates to tax relief. I guess it's our job to make sure that we approach any conversations about tax reliefs in the right way. Yeah.
Do you, in your opinion, do you think the theatrical experience will emerge stronger, or is the damage, do you think, going to be pretty hard to repair once we're out of this? What are your feelings around that? And I know you were doing obviously some work with BFI Audience to support obviously some of our good regional cinemas, with some overhead support. I think that's kind of the latest round of audience fund awards were given to some of the great regional cinemas. I just wonder what your thinking is around how they emerge from this the other side, not just obviously the independents, but also all the cinema chains.
Okay, well, look, I mean, there's a sort of philosophical part of this, and then there's a practical part to it. I mean, putting to one side the not insignificant practical challenges of getting cinemas open and operating at full speed, which will happen over a period of time. Do I believe that from a kind of cultural and habitual point of view, people will go back to cinemas? Yeah, I absolutely do. And I think it's really important that they do. The cinema experience is not the same as the streaming experience. They are both entirely valid, equally valid. Some people like doing one, some people like doing the other. I would say that in the same way that if you like going to football games, which I don't, by the way, you will be desperate to get back into your stadium with your tribe. People who like going to the cinema, and that's what you do, will go back to cinema. If you like going hanging out in Westfield on a Saturday afternoon, you'll go and hang out in Westfield on a Saturday afternoon. So, this is not a specific challenge to our industry. I really believe that cinema is a completely unique experience. And I've been watching loads of stuff at home. At the moment, I'm decided I've rewatched the entire Hitchcock canon. So that's what I'm doing. And, it's great, but it's not, I'd love to be watching cinema in an FT1. Yeah. And so it will return. And it's really important that what we don't do at this moment is, Charlotte, I've watched Vertigo. I haven't watched North by Northwest yet. Thanks. That just popped up in my chat. Let's not at this point sort of turn our backs on the thing we've always loved, because we've experienced a couple of months where It's been boom time for the streamers, and not just the streamers, by the way, because when we talk about the streamers, we forget to talk about the public service broadcasters who are so vital to, you know, the cultural landscape for film and TV in the UK. And, you know, we need to not forget in this moment that they also need to survive, because for the independent sector, they are absolutely key. But back to the point, no, I think cinemas will get back over a period of time, and we'll support them as best we can to that point. There is definitely an opportunity in online for more of us, both on the audience side and on the production side. So that's where we should focus. There is definitely more of an opportunity, but not at the expense of cinema.
Okay. And what about international partnerships? I mean, obviously the BFI leads on the co-production treaties and stuff. I mean, will that be, this is probably not a Brexit question really, but does that become less of a priority as all the countries in the world just kind of try to get their own economies back on track? I mean, how important will European and international partnerships be for the UK industry going forward?
Yeah, I mean, isn't it funny how Brexit feels like this cute little thing that happened last year?
Completely.
You know, if only, don't quote me on that, by the way, but you know what I mean? It's like, it's such a kind of odd moment where you're suddenly going, remember Brexit? I mean, I think that you know, we were coming through sort of the Brexit conversations, absolutely doubling down on the notion that international co-production and partnerships were as important as ever, and that is still very much the case. And I like, this might be a bit whimsical, but I do think that socially, culturally, what sort of global shutdown has done is remind us of community and remind us of our connections, particularly when we can't access them as easily. And you know, I think that the We Are One global film festival that, you know, Tribeca have led the charge on, and which London Film Festival is going to be part of, is a great example of, you know, a bunch of festivals that ordinarily are incredibly competitive with each other in some windows are coming together to offer a sort of 10-day program of cinema for global audiences. So, you know, we are strong as a community, and that was always, you know, in Berlin, that was the message we were giving to our sort of brothers and sisters in the sort of European production community, was that we are as one. They're, you know, vital from a trade point of view, vital from a cultural trading point of view. I think, you know, practically speaking, we also now have to look at the immediate needs that were emerging from Brexit, such as the replacement funding for the Creative Europe programme, and really accelerate that conversation with government, because, you know, we were already in a serious conversation with DCMS about how we would replace that vital funding so that we can carry on collaborating internationally. And our conversation with them now is very much that really needs to happen sooner. Yeah.
We've all been noticing blue skies and hearing lots about blue skies in LA, and lots of environmentally positive stories coming out of this. Is this a wake-up call for the industry itself on sustainability and environmental issues? Do you think it's possible to return to the way things were before after the pandemic?
I think, okay, so there's a couple of things in that. Firstly, I think when we've been looking at sustainability over the last couple of years, we have to look at it from a cost perspective, both in terms of where it costs more to do something and where you can actually save money. And again, we're sort of all experiencing our own versions of seeing our habits change in terms of consumption, spend, you know, how we're doing stuff. So I think maybe everyone will return to work with a sort of tweaked intuition and instinct around things. So it'll be interesting to see whether that, you know, sticks and sustains over the long term. Beyond that, again, I don't know. I'm sort of trying not to prognosticate too much on what sort of will or won't happen in terms of sort of social, cultural habits. I think that more broadly, we need to sort of think about, we're going to have to really take a look at our vulnerabilities as a sector, you know, and also our responsibilities as a sector. So, you know, whether they're to do with social inclusivity, whether they're to do with environmental responsibility, how we look after our workforce. Yeah, I think this is all in play. I do wonder in the short term whether it might need more private jets to get talent around the world than less. So
Right.
there's something we'll have to keep an eye
Counterintuitive
on.
suggestion.
I mean, I'm not saying that's a good thing. I'm just saying I'm wondering, it will be interesting to see what does emerge, because, you know, there are going to be costs of starting up production again. You know, will there be costs associated with making sure that we can run production safely, and what kind of environmental impact will they have, be it positive or negative? So I don't want to be too sort of rainbows and unicorns about stuff, because yes, aspirationally, we all hope the world will return in a better way, but there are going to be a lot of challenges getting there.
One final question before we wrap up. I know we're probably nearly out of time. Is there any discussion in the industry about maybe around next year's BAFTAs having a big celebratory fundraiser when things are hopefully back to some sort of normal? I mean, are there any kind of discussions going on around that yet?
I mean, I haven't been part.
Good idea, maybe doing something kind of like that.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I'm sort of holding sort of fortnightly calls with BAFTA at the moment, so we'll be checking in with each other and we can sort of have a chat. I think the question is, you know, yeah, who are we fundraising for? I mean, I think, you know, by that point we will definitely have a real sense of who has been long-term impacted by this this situation, and, you know, who has suffered, you know, or struggled the most to recover, even with all the government support, even with all the kind of public funding support that we can give. Who is still kind of fundamentally struggling? Is it the independent sector? Is it independent cinemas? Is it producers? Is it the freelance sector? And then we can really think about, you know, who still needs long-term sustained support. We've got a few months now to really try and right the ship. And I hope that I'm an optimistic person, so I do feel that we will go some way to righting the ship. But yeah, if a fundraiser is needed, you know, is it needed for us as a sector, or is it needed for others outside our industry who need it more than us? I suppose that's the question.
Yeah. Unless you want to say any final words, Ben, that's been an absolutely amazing conversation. Any sort of final words from you, or do you want to?
I'd like to sort of thank everyone who's working with us and who's you know, participating in conversations with us, and anyone who's got contributions to make on the other side of this, please make them. I mean, I think we're working well together as an industry. I think we are, you know, the key issues are really starting to clarify. You know, I think as a community, we're a very strong creative community, and I'd encourage everyone to sort of feel optimistic, but equally, none of us underestimate the scale of the challenge. So it's a case of, you know, getting our heads down, working hard, and being the professionals that we all are. So, you know, I think we need to give each other a collective group hug and get on with trying to figure things out.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's looking very positive. I think I have to congratulate you and the BFI in terms of the way you're leading on this. And it looks like there's just a lot of very smart people working together to make sure that we come out of this in a stronger place. So congratulations, Ben. Thank you so much for taking the time today. It's been a real pleasure to speak to you.
Thanks to you, Matt.
And thanks to everyone in the audience. Thank you for your questions. You know, we all look forward to the day when the worst of this pandemic is behind us. Ben will be one of those at the forefront of leading the UK film industry back into the light. So that's very good news. Our next talk is scheduled for Thursday, May 7th. So please keep an eye out on Screen Daily for confirmation of that later this week. As with all our talks, this conversation with Ben will be available on demand on Screen Daily from tomorrow. So please check out the site if you want to catch up with this talk or with any others. On that note, it just leaves me to say goodbye to all our viewers. Thank you for joining us today, and goodbye to Ben Roberts. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been a real pleasure talking to you. Thanks to everyone.
Bye.
Bye.